I don't think it'll be severe. I think markets work. I just don't think you're going to like the price you're going to pay for a while. Markets do work. High prices encourage supply and they reduce demand, however unpleasant that might be for a diesel consumer like yourself. Surprise, no. If my memory serves me well, we haven't permitted a greenfield refinery, particularly a middleweight refinery, since 1976 or 1977. I suspect myself that demand for refined petroleum products has grown a bit since 1976 or 1977. We have managed to increase our output by debottlenecking the existing refineries and making the existing refineries more efficient, but there's a limit to what you can do in terms of increasing the supply of refined products if you don't increase the capacity of the existing network. It's interesting to note that in the United States, for some period of time, we were able to continue to meet our own needs and develop a strong export industry simply because the U.S. refining industry on an absolute basis, but also on a competitive basis, was so much better than the industry in other parts of the world. We could take heavy sour crudes from Venezuela and Mexico, as an example, into our Gulf Coast refineries. And as a consequence of our technological expertise, not only use those feedstocks to support U.S. demand, but also contribute to a balance of payments surplus. When Mexican and Venezuelan supplies fell as a consequence of a lack of reinvestment by their national oil companies in their resources, we had and have a lot of surplus heavy and sour refining capacity in the U.S. Gulf Coast. We have access to heavy sour crudes from Canada, but we have refused for 20 years to support the Keystone Pipeline, which would have delivered as much as 1 million barrels a day of much needed feedstock to the U.S. refining complexes on the Gulf Coast. Had that happened, we wouldn't have a shortage of diesel. We'd have a surplus of diesel. I wouldn't want to cast all the blame on the Bidens. I think that most political processes in states and in the federal government pay more attention to the election cycle than they do to energy markets. And I think that even the Republicans, some Republicans at least, were nervous about spending political capital that they helped to spend elsewhere to support a project that went against the popular narrative, sort of promulgated by the big media, what I call the cabal of Babel. So I think there's plenty of room, if you go back 20 years, to share the blame. The sense that we're going to replace fossil fuels in the next 20 years or 25 years, it's a joke. The fact that we're going to replace them ever if we don't increase our nuclear fleet. The idea that you can stimulate supply for oil and gas in the United States in the near term with political exhortation, while at the same time telling the oil industry that you're going to put them out of business in 2030. Why would domestic oil producers increase their production if you told them, in fact, guaranteed them that you were going to put them out of business? The list of fictional narratives around energy is almost limitless. I would ask ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, those companies to compare their cost of capital and compare their operating margins over a levelized period of time, which is to say like 20 years, with big oil. And what you'll see is that the margins that are enjoyed by the energy industry, first of all, are very variable. Their costs of capital are fairly high, and their operating margins relative to other industries aren't very high at all. So when the oil industry is called out for excessive profits, when people suggest that there should be an excess profits tax, I guess I'd be all for that if there was a reduced profits rebate, which is to say that the oil industry, as an example, during the COVID years, lost billions and billions and billions of dollars. For some reason, you didn't say the major media networks or the administration proposed to give the oil industry $1 billion in rebates on taxes that they had already been charged. So I would ask again that the discussion around things like that take place in the context of arithmetic rather than narrative. First of all, it's important to note that nuclear energy, despite the fact that at least 2 years ago nobody liked it, generates 14% of total U.S. electricity consumed and 20% of baseload energy consumed. It's worthy to note, too, that this is reliable baseload energy that generates no carbon. So to the extent that people are concerned about carbon loading, by the way, I'm one of those that is concerned about carbon loadings, nuclear is irreplaceable. The industry, according to the International Energy Agency, spends about $60 a pound fully loaded. By fully loaded, I mean including cost of capital, general and administrative expense, prior year write-downs, to produce a product that they sell for $50 a pound, which is to say the uranium industry worldwide loses about $10 a pound fully loaded 125 or 130 million times a year. Now, what that means is if the uranium price doesn't go up enough to cover the cost of production, the world won't have any uranium, and the world can't not have uranium. The oversupply circumstance that has existed for the last 10 or 12 years happened as a consequence, of course, of the shutdown of the Japanese nuclear fleet, the second largest nuclear fleet in the world. It's interesting to note now that total worldwide consumption exceeds total worldwide consumption before Fukushima, which is to say we have made up for the Japanese shortfall by commissioning reactors, particularly in China, but also in Korea, Taiwan, places like that. And now it appears as though Japan is restarting their nuclear fleet. So we're building reactors around the world, not so much in developed nations, but around the world like mad, and planned shutdowns in the United States, in Germany, in Sweden, in Britain, and other places are being canceled. But the industry still loses money on every pound of uranium produced. So my suspicion is that the uranium price will at least exceed $60 a pound, which is to say the level that's necessary to sustain current production from current facilities. Much more likely, the price of uranium will exceed $70 or $75 a pound, which is the likely incentive price necessary to fund the capital investments to bring in much needed new supplies of uranium. My thesis is simply that if something has to happen, which it must, and can happen, which it can, it will happen. And if you saw prices in uranium through $75 or $80 a pound, I think what you would see would be a real renaissance in the uranium mining business. And I think you will see that.